In today's video, we are gonna have some fun. We're gonna look at 100 years of weird and wacky and silly knit patterns. Hi, my name is Matilda and welcome back to Miss Matti, the channel where I show all about sewing, knitting, mending, upcycling, and generally how to live an awesome and sustainable life. And if that sounds like something for you, please consider hitting the subscribe button and hit the notification bell so you will be notified when I'm uploading a new video. In today's video, we are gonna have some fun. We're gonna do something quite different. We're gonna look at 100 years of weird and wacky and silly knit patterns. I got this idea from Stephanie Canada. She made a video of 100 years of weird sewing patterns. And it was so fun, so I will link to her video in the description box down below, so you can check that video out if you're interested. So what Stephanie did in her video was going from the 1920s to the 2010s, but in my case I wanted to go for the 1900s. I do not know if that was a good idea or not. I went through each decade. I decided to pick at least 2 patterns per decade. There are some decades I couldn't resist adding more. And also it's women's wear, clothes you would wear or accessories, not costumes, not weird dolls, not weird houseware. There is plenty of that. Also, I decided to include just knitted garments, no crochet. If you want me to make a crochet video, I have plenty of materials for that as well. So let me know in a comment down below if that is of interest to you, because there's one decade specifically that has a lot of crazy crochet. And if you can guess which decade that is, also let me know in a comment down below. Another thing I want to say, that everything here is like my opinion about wacky and weird knitted pieces, and it's also from a very 2021 lens. And on top of that, I don't claim to be this type of fashion expert who think my taste is superior. I just really want to highlight that when I say wacky and weird knit patterns, I love wacky and weird knit patterns. Like, some of them are strange, but as a knitwear designer, I cannot deny the skills that have gone into making some of these pieces. And some of them I even want to make. It's like so wacky and weird that I will need it in my life. But I just want to let you know, this is not like a bashing anything, or maybe we are some cases. You know, if you think differently from me, I would love to hear from you. If we are just having fun here, enjoying some wacky and weird knitted pieces, right? So let's get started with the early 1900s. So this is when women started to wear knitwear, or we were wearing knitwear before, but like when it started to become more popular, and a lot of the knitwear women started to wear in the beginning of the 1900s were inspired by menswear, and specifically wear classic, sporty, knitted jumpers and so on. So a lot of the stuff in the early 1900s is very, very classic. So it was very hard to find anything crazy, wacky and silly, but I think I found some good materials in the end. So this is a tucked sweater that looks very similar to a lot of the tucked blouses during the Edwardian era. And that's why I think it's such a wacky, weird and fun pattern, because of the tucks and recreation of a piece that isn't a knitted piece. I do not know if this was common at all, or if this was just this knit pattern. I just think it's really fun, so that's why I decided to include it. I just love this whole concept of taking another type of garment that wouldn't be knitted and then turn it into a knitted garment. That's something with that I just love. I do not know if I have another pattern actually. I have 2 at least for the rest of the decades, but I found it so hard, as I mentioned earlier, to find the weirdness with the early on patterns, because they're so classic. Even if I personally do not like them, there's nothing weird about them. They're just classic jumpers and cardigans. So let's move over to the 1910s. That's when it started to become a bit more weird. So the first one is pretty wacky, I think. It's hard as well to judge if a lot of these are wacky in the early 1900s because a lot of them are printed in black and white. And I find a lot of the really weird ones that I found, it's not just the patterns itself, it's the colors they picked for the photos that make you like, ooh. This one should just be black and white, but I imagine this is like a Kusama type of outfit, something like, what's her name, Yayoi Kusama would wear with like matching polka dot dress underneath in like blue polka dots with yellow on both or something like that, or red, or you know, I that's quite a funky one. And another one that I find quite wacky and weird is this sort of jacket slash cardigan with a belt, which was very popular during this time. But what makes this wacky and weird is the overuse of buttons as details, and the buttons they use as well, and those pockets that looks like they're hanging but sort of on the edge of it. Yeah, and the belt details and that little strap here. It's so much going on. And I think they say that the colors they recommend is a pistache green with a dark red. So yeah, you get it. It's thought to become more wacky when you know which colors they recommend. Before that, you may think, oh, black and white, fine. But with like pistache green and a dark red, yeah, it's thought to become very wacky. Let's look at the 1920s. This is the decade when knitwear started to become more common and way more interesting. That you can see from, like, example, designers like Coco Chanel and Elsa Schiaparelli. So this jumper, made by Elsa Schiaparelli in 1927, the cravat jumper. This jumper, I think, really, amongst other pieces she made, really shifted how we went going forward the next upcoming decades with knitwear. Because from the 1930s, knitwear becomes crazier until peak nuttiness in the 1980s. We will get there. We will get there. I could make a whole video on the 1980s, by the way, just saying. But we are in the 1920s, so let's look at the crazy knitwear of the 1920s. I actually didn't find that much crazy, wacky, silly knitwear in the 1920s either. Even if it started to become more interesting, I still think a lot of it is just beautiful, classic, nothing out of the ordinary. But there were some things I found. I like this check, pocket, cuff, collar, jumper ensemble with a little teeny tiny belt. So it looks like that checkboard paint in that Disney short film Santa's Workshop. Yeah, I don't mind check patterns, but it's something off with this design. It's the placement of the pockets, it's like the color, the belt specifically, those buttons on the pockets. I like the cuffs though. I think that's a nice detail. And maybe they would work in another setting, but together. And then we have this one here, a knitted lampshade hat. It's not called that, but it looks exactly like a knitted lampshade. This lampshade hat just makes me think of when my friend Angela had a fashion show 14, 15 years ago. She has to confirm this, which year it was. And I was modeling for her and she put lampshades on all the models. That's quite wacky. I love it. But yeah, it is definitely in the category of wacky and weird. So let's get into the 1930s. As I mentioned earlier, this is when knitwear started to become way more interesting. And this is where I had to try to condense and not include everything I found. As there were so many candidates, I'm gonna include 3 patterns for this decade. And first out is this actually really beautiful uniform ski jumper. I think it's gorgeous. So this jacket really reminds me of something that Hedi Slimane, when he was the designer-in-chief for their home, would have made. It's beautiful in my opinion, but quite wacky to wear in the ski slopes. Maybe not the 1930s, or maybe it was. So another weird sort of fun knit style from the early 1900s is of course knitted bathing suits. I love them, but some of them are quite weird and silly and wacky. Like this one here, it sort of has a little collar. Then this white thing going down here. And a little belt with a bow. And this pattern, that I know it's not the Lululemon logo because Lululemon didn't exist yet, but it looks like the whole Lululemon logo all over it. It's quite a cute fit, but it's the whole bow thing going on, I think, that makes it not really land for me. I think it's a nice shape though. So if you change that pattern to something else, maybe skip those contrasting bows, maybe it will actually look quite good. Maybe. So this is the reason why I decided we needed to have 3 patterns for this decade. This jumper, I do not know what really happened. It's like 2 breast pockets with nipple tassels hanging on them. But they're not like placed actually on her where the nipples would be. They're like a bit further down underneath her breast. And then they add on a weird little belt and this collar. And the belt does nothing. It's too close to the nipple tassel thing hanging here. And yeah, it just doesn't really do anything for that design. But I got an idea looking at this. Like making a knitted sort of version of Madonna's famous Jean-Paul Gaultier pointy bra thing and put nipple tassels on it and make a knit version of it. It's gonna be wacky and weird, but it's gonna look better than this. So let's get into the 1940s. This is a decade where it's so many funky and fun jacquard knit pieces, and I love majority of them. I think they're beautiful. Maybe some people will think they are wacky and weird, but not me. Look at me today. I'm wearing a cut out top and my massive hoops. I'm definitely not a boring person when it comes to style. I like fun stuff, but there are some designs that I like that are sort of on the border, like this Egyptian themed jacquard knit jumper. But the wackiest and weirdest of all the novelty jacquard knit jumpers that I found was this telephone number jumper. Yeah, I was a bit like my phone number for everyone to see and call me unsolicited. No thanks. But my friend said, as she can never remember her phone number, she would find it quite handy to have this on her jumper. Which is fair, we do not really remember our phone numbers anymore. Another winner when it came to wacky and weird jacquard knit jumpers is this a jumper with all the boys' names. You can definitely tell that this is the 1940s with the names. It's like Tommy, what does it say? Dick, Eddie, Stanley, Harry, Bill, Joe, and what else? Frank. This made me think of like maybe a bit more than a decade ago, before all the dating apps and stuff. I was on a dating site in the UK and I made an observation that majority of the men in the UK born in the 1980s almost all have the same name. There are Alex, there are Mike, there are Dan, Tom, James, Adam, what else? Matt. Yeah, I might have forgot some of them, but you know, you get it. It's like the same names showing up. So I could probably make the 80s kid version of this. Let's go to the 1950s. It seems like, at least from the things I could see online, that the 1950s went for a more classic look again. This is very interesting because Stephanie Canada, in her weird sewing pattern video, mentioned that the 1950s, when it comes to sewing patterns, has a lot of wacky stuff. So my suspicion is that we might went crazy with the other garments, but knitwear stayed quite classic. But I might be wrong, this might just be what's popular to buy or to knit online, because the 1950s is a very popular decade when it comes to vintage knitwear. So let's look at the wackiest things I could find. Hats again. Yeah, these are all quite funny. I don't know what to say really. The one furthest to the top to the right maybe isn't super wacky. It looks like some of the hats that were not uncommon to wear in the 1950s, but the other ones are really funny. One thing I find really interesting looking back at a lot of these vintage knit patterns is that we today, when we put on knitted hats or toques as Canadians like to call it, we put them quite like further down over the ears, right? A lot of the vintage patterns, they're like sitting quite high up on the head. So they're probably meant to be more decorative than practical and warm for winter. And these 4 patterns are definitely in that category. I think the wackiest of them all though is the crown piece. Another style from the 1950s that I don't think it's super weird in general, but it does a very weird thing with its design, and it's pointing to a lady's private parts, if you know what I'm saying. And this is something that's definitely noticed in a lot of the patterns that she went through as well in her video. A lot of like weird arrows going towards that area, or weird sort of exaggerated diaper styles, and yeah, you have to see her video to know what I'm talking about if you haven't already. But yeah, this is a bit weird. Let's move over to the 1960s. The 1960s was also very tricky when it came to like clothes you wear, because it was very classic what I could find there as well, or very typical 1960s, which I love. So the wackiness was yet again in the hats, especially this red one. It looks like a baby hat, but it's made for women. And it has these little flowers and that weird white pom-pom. And then it looks like one of those pacifiers that kids have, but on the back of someone's head. Not a fan. The blue one, that's okay. The green one, I think you can pull it off if you have the right style, but not my thing. And then we have the perfect slippers for when you need to clean the house. They're called moppets. Retro floor dusters, so I think they're meant to be to clean your house. Love it. I need to actually make these. I think I need to. Also great for this space because it gets dusty in here. So I can just wear them and walk around and dust the floors. Love it. The 1970s was the knit West's decade. And some of them were better than others, and some of them were worse than others. Like this one here, I do not know, I think it is the colors, but these vests are also equally badly styled. This is the thing I've noticed when it comes to knit patterns, is that if they present it with really bad color combinations, you think it's like, ooh. But I think if you look at the smaller picture here, when it's pastels, it actually can be quite cute. So it seems like you get the heart design and the boat design, and with the stripy details around it. And then you get this weird triangle design, which looks really strange when it's black and white like this, but looks really cute in pastels. And the same with the one with a heart when it is in pastels. I'm imagining like these two can be really cute to wear with like a nice, very frilly blouse, going for a very like sweet Lolita style with a big fluffy poofy skirt with a petticoat underneath. I think that could look really good. But with this styling, I don't get this. Like the vest is too short, and then they have this lower waist trousers, or like maybe it's a mid-rise. It gives this weird gap with this shirt they're wearing underneath. Then they have these belts underneath. It's just too much. It reminds me a little bit of what's his face, Gok Wan's styling, when he's always gonna put a belt on everything. Yeah, so I just think it's the styling and the colors. I think this could actually look really good if it's done in other colors and styled differently. Now it's time for the 1980s. It's the decade of wacky knitwear. This is when the ugly Christmas jumper was born in its full acrylic glory. I had so many potential patterns for the 1980s, but I found this book that had pure gold. I want this book. It's called, let me see, With Knits. It's from 1986. I've seen it as a PDF on Etsy, but I want it printed. So if anyone has this book or know where I can buy it, let me know, because I need this book in my life. And it just has the most crazy knitwear in it. I think majority of the actors are British actors. I only know one of them by name, but I recognize the faces of some of the other ones. So if you know who they are, let me know. So much. Like this one. I do not know where to start. It's someone reading a book that it says knitability on. It's a worm going through the book. I have no comments. So this is Joanna Lumley wearing... What is this? What is it that she's wearing? Some type of animal? Or is it a type of face? It looks like a crazy professor with crazy hair and glasses. Yeah, I don't know what it is. I think it's a face, but I'm holding it further away from me. Let me know what you think it is. There's so much good gold in this book. I'm just trying to pick the best stuff for you, but that's hard. Okay, this one is fantastic. I'm a luxury, it says on the front. And then on the back, few can afford. Pure gold. But this actor or model, he looks like someone who would go to his yacht club in the 1980s and drink some margaritas on his fancy sailing boat. And I do not know if this is the jumper you should wear if you are that type. This is the type of jumper I'm imagining like a hip-hop artist wear, or someone on TikTok that is young. Then I think you can pull this off, but not if you look like you would be this type of dude. And then we have this dude. I had to include this one. He holds a pineapple and he wears a jumper that says banana on, and with his facial expression. I have no words. And I know I have shown you a lot from this book and from the 1980s, but I have one I could not resist including, and that is these two jumpers here. I have no idea what to say. I think it's a fun idea to have something sticking out of it, but it's the thing that they picked the red specifically for the red one. The black is also strange, but it's not as strange, because that makes me think of nipples on pigs, and I do not know if I want to have pig nipples on my front body. Strange.
Feeling like I'm running out of time. Every day the same, because I'm looking for a sign instead of chasing it. The good of the
So now let's get into the last decade of the 20th century, the 1990s. As someone who was a child in the 1990s, I do remember a lot of the knitwear through this decade. Anyway, let's get into the wacky stuff of the 1990s. So initially when I was researching knit patterns for the 1990s, I didn't find much wacky, but I remember in my machine knitting books that there is a lot of wacky stuff. So I took a look in the Passat knitting books from the 1990s. The first one out would be this cardigan over here. This cardigan looks like something I would have made in Microsoft PowerPoint in 1995. Like sort of have that whole gradient background design, then smashing on some clip art. and some stripy detailing over here with a box. And I do not know if I want to wear PowerPoints. And then I think that some knit patterns sort of didn't leave the 80s, because in one of my books we had first this wine and cheese jumper with matching skirt, and then we had something even wackier: carrots, carrot headband, carrot top, and carrot jacket. I mean, I can admire the skills that went into making these. I really know what it takes to make something like this really well. They have all these gathers for the carrots on the knitting machine. That must require quite a lot of work. But it's wacky and weird, isn't it? So that was me going through 100 years of weird and wacky and silly knit patterns. What did you think about the patterns that I included in this video? Were they wacky and weird? Do you love them? Do you hate them? And do you know any other wacky and weird knit patterns that I didn't include in this video? Leave a comment down below and let me know. I would love to hear from you. And until next time, bye!